He died at just 32 years old. Yet by the time he breathed his last, he had conquered the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. In a single decade, one man from a small kingdom in northern Greece marched through deserts, mountains, and empires, defeating armies many times the size of his own. His name was Alexander of Macedon. History remembers him as Alexander the Great, but behind the glory and the crowns, his life was filled with contradictions. A visionary, student of philosophy, who became a ruthless conqueror, a man who sought unity but left chaos behind, a king who dreamed of being a god and yet died alone in Babylon. To understand Alexander is to understand ambition itself, how far the human spirit can reach before it breaks. This is not a legend. Every step you will hear was walked, every battle fought, every name recorded in the ancient chronicles of history. Let's go back to where it all began in 356 BC in the small city of Pella, where a boy was born whose destiny would reshape the ancient world. Alexander was born in July 356 BC in the ancient Macedonian capital of Pella. His father, King Philip II, was a brilliant strategist, the man who transformed Macedonia from a weak kingdom into the dominant power of Greece. His mother, Olympias, was known for her fiery spirit and her belief that her son was destined for greatness, even claiming he was fathered by Zeus himself. As a boy, Alexander was educated by one of the greatest minds in history, Aristotle. Under him, Alexander studied philosophy, politics, science, and the art of war. But more than knowledge, Aristotle taught him ambition, to think beyond borders, beyond kings, beyond limits. At just 12 years old, Alexander tamed a wild horse that no man could control. The horse's name was Bucephalus, and it would carry him through every battle until the end. By 16, his father left him in charge of Macedonia while he went to war. When a neighboring tribe revolted, Alexander crushed them, built a city in his name, Alexandropolis, and left no doubt that he was his father's son. But destiny would come sooner than expected. In 336 BC, during a celebration, Philip II was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own guards. The court erupted in chaos, and the young prince, just 20 years old, suddenly became king. Alexander moved swiftly. He executed rivals, secured loyalty through force and diplomacy, and crushed revolts across Greece. When the city of Thebes rebelled, he destroyed it completely, sparing only temples and the house of the poet Pindar. The message was clear: no one defies Alexander. With Greece under control, he turned his eyes east to Persia, the greatest empire of his time, stretching from Egypt to India. What began as vengeance for the Persian invasions of Greece would soon become the most ambitious military campaign in human history. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia, with 40,000 men. Before setting foot on Persian soil, he threw a spear into the ground and declared it a gift to the gods, a symbolic claim that Asia was already his. His first major battle came at Granicus River. The Persian satraps underestimated him. Against all odds, Alexander charged directly across the river, a move that shocked his enemies. By the end of the day, tens of thousands lay dead, and the Persian front line was broken. From there, he marched south through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities from Persian control. But the real test awaited. King Darius III, ruler of the Persian Empire, was assembling a massive army to crush the young invader. In 333 BC, they met at Issus, outnumbered almost 2 to 1. Alexander personally led the attack. His tactics, speed, precision, and the deadly phalanx formation turned chaos into victory. Darius fled, leaving behind his family and treasure. To Alexander, this wasn't just war, it was destiny unfolding. He pressed on to Tyre, one of the most fortified cities in the world. For 7 long months, his men built a causeway across the sea, enduring arrows and fire. When they finally broke through, the city burned, a warning to all who resisted. Then came Egypt. The people welcomed him as a liberator. At the mouth of the Nile, he founded Alexandria, which would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. But even as he wore the crown of Pharaoh, his eyes turned east again. Persia was not yet finished. In 331 BC, Alexander faced Darius once more, this time at Gaugamela. The Persian army numbered over 200,000 Alexanders, barely 47,000 yet. Once again, his genius prevailed. Darius fled into the night, and soon after, he was betrayed and killed by his own men. At just 25 years old, Alexander the Great had conquered the Persian Empire. In 327 BC, after years of endless conquest, Alexander set his sights on the edge of the known world, India. To the Greeks, it was a land of mystery, rivers that sparkled like gold, and warriors said to be as fierce as gods. The journey was brutal. His men marched across deserts and mountains, through scorching heat and blinding monsoons. Many died along the way of hunger, exhaustion, or disease. But Alexander pressed forward, driven by something greater than glory. He wanted to reach the place where the world ended and leave his name there. The first major obstacle came at the Hindu Kush Mountains, vast, icy peaks separating Persia from the Indian subcontinent. His army crossed them in freezing conditions, losing thousands. Yet Alexander's determination never broke. At the foot of the mountains lay the city of Aornus, believed to be unconquerable. No army had ever taken it, not even the legendary Hercules, according to Greek lore. But Alexander built siege engines, scaled impossible cliffs, and after fierce fighting, he captured Aornus, adding another impossible victory to his name. In 326 BC, Alexander reached the mighty Indus River, where he met King Pyrrhus, the ruler of the Punjab. Pyrrhus commanded an army unlike anything the Greeks had ever seen. Thousands of soldiers and war elephants, massive beasts that terrified men and horses alike. The two armies clashed on the plains near the Hydaspes River. It was one of the most brutal battles of Alexander's career. Rain turned the field into mud, elephants charged through formations, and the air filled with the sound of metal and screams. But Alexander, as always, adapted. He used his cavalry to flank Pyrrhus's forces, isolating the elephants and turning the chaos against the defenders. When the battle ended, Pyrrhus stood bleeding, surrounded, but unbroken. When Alexander asked how he wished to be treated, Pyrrhus replied, "Like a king." Alexander smiled and spared him, appointing him as governor of his own kingdom. It was a rare moment of respect between two great leaders, but this victory came with a cost. Alexander's men, weary from years of war, began to lose faith. When he demanded they continue east toward the Ganges River, they refused. For the first time in his life, the conqueror of the world was told no. He wept in his tent for days, realizing that even kings cannot conquer the will of men. Finally, he turned back, his dream of reaching the end of the world left unfulfilled. The march home was longer and crueler than any battle. Alexander led his men south through the Gedrosian Desert, one of the most unforgiving places on earth. The heat was unbearable. Men collapsed by the hundreds, their armor melting under the sun. Of the 60,000 who began the journey, only a fraction survived. But Alexander's obsession never faded. He continued to build cities, Alexandrias, as symbols of his eternal presence. Wherever he went, Greek culture followed, art, language, and philosophy spreading across Asia like wildfire. By 324 BC, he returned to Babylon, the heart of his empire. He was now the ruler of Greece, Egypt, Persia, and much of India. The boy from Pella had achieved what no one before him had even dared to dream. Yet his victories brought no peace. His closest friends began to die, some through illness, others through suspicion. Paranoia consumed him. He executed generals he once trusted, including Parmenion and Cletus, the man who had saved his life at Granicus. In one drunken rage, Alexander killed Cletus with his own spear, a moment that haunted him until his death. He began to see himself not as mortal, but divine, demanding his men bow before him as a god. Many refused. Whispers spread that the great king had lost his mind. Still, he dreamed of new conquests. He planned to invade Arabia and beyond, creating a world that would stretch to the ocean. But destiny intervened. In June 323 BC, Alexander fell ill after a banquet. Fever consumed him for days. Despite all his physicians' efforts, his condition worsened. When his generals asked who should succeed him, he whispered his final words to the strongest. Within hours, the greatest conqueror of the ancient world was gone. He died in Babylon at just 32 years old, undefeated in battle, but conquered by fate. When Alexander died, his empire stretched from Greece to India, more than 2 million square miles. But without his leadership, it began to fracture almost immediately. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought brutal wars to divide his territories. Macedonia, Egypt, Persia, all were claimed and carved into pieces. The dream of a united world died with him. Yet Alexander's influence was immortal. Wherever his armies had marched, Greek culture remained. Cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of knowledge, philosophy, and trade for centuries. The spread of Greek language and ideas created a new era, the Hellenistic age, a time when East and West merged, when science, art, and philosophy flourished like never before. Even the greatest leaders after him, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and countless others, studied his campaigns, his tactics, his vision. To some, he was a hero, a genius who brought civilizations together. To others, a tyrant whose hunger for power left millions dead. But no matter how history judges him, one truth remains. He changed the world, not just through conquest, but through connection. Over 2,000 years later, the name Alexander the Great still echoes through time, not as a myth, but as a reminder of how far one human will go to leave a mark on eternity. This was Alexander the Great, the boy who conquered the world.